If this is my turn, then good evening to you all. The ambassador has simplified my job. I can only take up a few issues now. Um, so it's a good initiative. Let me congratulate the organizers for putting up this together. This is a troubling time for the Tibetans. The August 29th last year, 2020, the 7th Tibet Forum meeting, which is a study session of the parliament, which Xi Jinping started taking over since 2017 from Chia Qinglin of the CPPCC, China People's Political Consultative Conference. Since then, there has been the Xi Jinping's initiative on Tibet. And so on August 29th last year, Xi Jinping addressed the 7th Tibet Forum meeting in which he suggested that China should Sinicize Tibetan Buddhism, which means basically they want to integrate completely Tibet into the Chinese fold, not just the territory, which they have already put it up in 1951 through a 17-point agreement, but also the spirit of Tibet, the religion of Tibet, the culture of Tibet. And this is many of you who are researchers in ethnic related matters. You understand that the two things are there in ethnic policies. One is integration, second is assimilation. Assimilation would mean complete lock, stock, barrel assimilating those people into the mainstream ethnic majorities. So here in this case, the Han Chinese want to integrate, assimilate completely the Tibetans into their fold, which means that they will not have any differentiation in terms of the Han or Tibetan or other ethnic minorities. So the assimilationist policies were followed during Cultural Revolution, where the Red Guards went on rampage, destroyed over 4,000 Buddhist monasteries, and also suggested that religion be abolished in many of the Tibetan monasteries, as with the Han Buddhist monasteries in the rest of China. So the assimilationist policies in ethnic dimension of China has this streak of thought where they want to gobble up everything. The second policy we see in ethnic policies is integration. So integration would be co-opting the elites, telling them that there will be some reservations in education, in jobs, in others. And so they co-opt the elites in the mainstream, into the mainstream. And over a period of time, they convince the minorities to see if they could integrate with the other Han majority. We all see this across the world, how the Americans have treated the Red Indians in terms of the assimilation policy. Or we see in Canada, in several places. Recently, there is a controversy about educational institutions in Canada, where they have to punish the children, and mass graves were also found in that. So this is an extreme assimilationist policy, which China today intends to implement in Tibet. So Xi Jinping's visit, as ambassador has mentioned, to Tibet, Ningxi and Lhasa on July 21, 23, last month, is to assimilate Tibet completely into the mainstream idea. So this is the basic problem that the Tibetans are now facing. Let me take you back to why this could be a conundrum as the organizers suggested. Now, for China, Tibet is about 2.5 million square kilometers out of 9 million square kilometers. So, and of this, nearly half, that is about 1 million square kilometers, is the plateau, and with an average elevation of 4,500 meters. So, the geography has its own problems for China. Many Han Chinese are going to Tibet, but they cannot sustain, they cannot stay there, partly because the oxygen content is very less. So they found in these genetic studies that the Tibetan race has some 30 genes which are specifically for the Tibetans, and they can retain the oxygen content even with less oxygen in the atmosphere. So that is how we see, for instance, Gorkhas, Sherpas, uh, Ladakh people. They can carry huge baggage as well sometimes. Sherpas, for instance, as porters, can go up to the Mount Everest without much physical exhaustion or others. So this is specific to those hill people, and and that is not part of the Han Chinese genetic character. So many Chinese who go to Tibet, they cannot sustain that atmosphere, and they have to return back to the mainland China. So this is a big conundrum for the Chinese. There are estimates that the Marung, a Beijing University-based ethnologist, he had recounted there are three phases of migration of Han Chinese into Tibet. Those who permanently stay back in Tibet as officials, for instance, the party secretary of Tibet is Mr. Wu, and he went to Tibet when he was 1 year old. And for the past 60 odd years, he has been living in Tibet. So you may recall that Xi Jinping, when he visited, Mr. Wu accompanied Mr. Xi in the Tibet visit, Tibet entourage. So there are these some Chinese, Han Chinese, who migrated to Tibet, but this is about 1 to 3% of their population. The second migration is those who do construction jobs, like huge hydroelectricity dams or Tibet Railway project or other major municipal projects they conduct. So these are the ones who stay for longer period, 8, 9 years, 10 years, till the construction jobs are over. So this section is slightly higher in percentage, and the largest, of course, is those who stay back, like Mr. Wu, who stayed for this long, and that is very small percentage of the population. So they find the atmosphere, the oxygen content as a problematic. So in many places in Tibet, you find oxygen kiosks, so that they go and get these oxygen content, and of course there is medicine, there is other things. There are 6.3 million Tibetans in Tibet. There are 160,000 Tibetans in India, and roughly over 3 to 400,000 abroad. 7.5 million Han Chinese live in Tibet. So they actually have surpassed the Tibetans in Tibet. So the concept of autonomous region, etc., is thrown to the winds by now having the Han Chinese, 7.5 million Han to 6.3 million Tibetans. Every year, some 30 million tourists visit Tibet. Most of them are Han Chinese, 90 odd percentage are Han Chinese. So that means, again, there is a lot of pressure from the Han Chinese. Many of them also kind of settle down in Tibet in business operations. For example, closer to the Potala Palace, The shops are now entirely manned by the Han Chinese. They displace the locals, the Tibetans, and so there is a study by TIN, Tibet Information Network. For every 60 kilometers of the spread of railways or any other infrastructure project like roads or energy pipelines or airfields or telecommunications, there is the influx of the Han Chinese into Tibet. So as a result of all these infrastructure that triggered the Han migration into Tibet, this has become the biggest conundrum for the Chinese as well as for the Tibetans mostly. So while these tourists bring $7 billion of revenues, most of these go to the Han Chinese rather than to the Tibetans. Many of the infrastructure projects, the Chinese have released a few white papers on Tibet. You can access this at china.org.cn. In these, they keep mentioning, see, in 1951, there are only a few schools, a few hospitals, a few other infrastructure projects. Look at the situation now. In 2021, there are these many thousands, lakhs of schools, projects, hospitals, or other things. What they don't tell you is who is using all these. If you say educational institutions, how many Tibetans are studying Tibetan? Now it is mandatory on the part of all these to learn Mandarin, Putonghua, in these schools. Although the Tibetan Autonomous Region would mean they have to have their own language be taught as the first language, but nevertheless that does not happen. So many Tibetan kids, they have to learn Mandarin, and so there is a problem with this. Secondly, if you look at the hospitals, it is actually visited by mostly Han rather than by the Tibetans. So the propaganda that we have so many schools, we have so many hospitals, we have so much of infrastructure, this basically caters to the Han Chinese. So the $7 billion of revenues that are generated by these Tibet Railway or other, there are four main highways into Tibet, from Chengdu, from Kunming, from Gormud, from Xinjiang. In all these, we find mainly Han Chinese visiting Tibet, and also the middlemen are also the Han Chinese, in the sense the shopkeepers, the hotel receptionists, workers in the restaurants, shops, all these are by the Han Chinese. So while China says that the Tibetan GDP is increasing, we need to remember that Tibet is the poorest place in China. $1,000 is the per capita income compared to the national $9,700. So about 10 times the 1/10 of the national per capita income. So this is a problem when we go into the details. So the devil is in detail here. That is a big conundrum, and as a result of this, there is discontent among the Tibetans. There are about 100 sites in Tibet for mining, and every year $130 billion of copper, zinc, lead, gold, uranium, all these are pumped out for China's modernization. There is hardly any modernization within Tibet, except for the infrastructure, but the rest of the country benefits, including water. The bottled water in China is mainly made in Tibet and exported to the rest of. So they advertise by saying that this is from some place in Tibet, because Tibet is the fountainhead of all the water in China as well as for South Asia, Southeast Asia. Um, uh, Glacier meltdown creates the rivers Brahmaputra for India, to an extent Ganga, Yamunotri as well from Aksai Chin region, and Kailash Manasarovar region. Um, in Southeast Asia, the Mekong, Irrawaddy, Salween, these are the ones which water the Southeast Asia. In addition, of course, to Yarlung Zampo, which becomes Brahmaputra, and then Yangtze River and Yellow River, which are the biggest rivers. They originated in the traditional Tibetan areas. So resources are pumped out from Tibet, and the GDP of Tibet as at $20 billion roughly is mentioned as compared to 1951. This is quite huge, but nevertheless, the Tibetans hardly benefit out of that, except of course infrastructure. Which includes infrastructure includes 118,000 kilometers of roads, and they are building at a breakneck speed of 4,000 kilometers per annum. The Tibet Railway was built in 2006, and recently the Ningchi Railway, where Xi Jinping went for supervision of that railway at a cost of nearly $6 billion. And the length is only 400 kilometers, 409 kilometers. So this has created a lot of problems. The conundrum here is the glaciers are melting at around 15% in 5 decades. So there is the IPCC as well as other estimates that the glacier meltdown is creating havoc, because then it would be the South Asia, Southeast Asia, which also bear the brunt of this environmental degradation. Water I just mentioned. The lower riparian states like India, Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, they're all dependent on this. China has no lower riparian treaty as an upper riparian treaty, although international legal practice does mention about the lower riparian rights, lower riparian states' rights. Yet India practices unipolarity here and unilateralism here on water issues. With no lower riparian state, China had concluded an agreement. So this suggests there is a high-handedness of China in this regard. So if you remember, during Xi Jinping's visit, he visited Ningchi prefecture, which is not far away from where China is constructing those 26 dams across the Yarlung Zampo. Already 11 dams have been constructed in Tibet. There is the South-North River Diversion Project, through which some 17 billion cubic meters of water will be diverted. So this has become a big problem for the rest of the, so not just for China, but it's a conundrum for the rest of South Asia and Southeast Asia. So that is one where we need to recognize the problem in. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash spoke about the issues that the Tibetans face in Tibet. The Chinese use the ethnic minorities recognition as a tool in terms of the promoting one ethnic group against the other. And from that point of view, it has also become kind of controversial. In 1965, the Tibet Autonomous Region, as we now see in the maps, was formed by dividing traditional Tibet. In other words, a divide and rule policy was adopted. In 65, Qinghai was carved out of the Amdo province, traditional Amdo province, and Kham region, where Khampas come from, has been integrated into Sichuan and Yunnan provinces. While what we see TAR is Utsang of the traditional Tibet. So when the TAR was formed in 1965, Indian government did not protest. While the Ladakh Union Territory was formed, the Chinese not only protested but went to the United Nations Security Council raising the Kashmir issue. When President Pranab Mukherjee visited Arunachal Pradesh, or when the Dalai Lama visited Arunachal Pradesh, or others, Prime Minister Modi and others have visited Arunachal Pradesh, there is the protest launched by the Chinese, but the MEA has not protested Xi Jinping's visit to Ningxi prefecture, which is just a few kilometers from Arunachal Pradesh borders. So there is also this aspect that we need to remember in terms of course, we don't get anything by just, for the sake of protesting, but that is one we need to also keep in mind. They call peaceful liberation on May 23rd, 1951. So provisions in these 17 points, but the most crucial ones are Tibet would become an integral part of the People's Republic of China. The Tibetan people would exercise national regional autonomy under the central government and enjoy freedom of religion. Reform would be carried out through consultation, and central government would handle the external affairs. These are the key provisions in 17, but the Dalai Lama was not satisfied with all these. In fact, as we discussed, there is the assimilation policy rather than integration, and so he simply walked away from Tibet in 1959. That resulted in the uprising, and Chinese troops suppressed the Tibetan protests. So every year the Tibetans celebrate that as an occasion, the March 1959 uprising, coinciding with the Dalai Lama's flight. So these are some issues in terms of the problems between China and Tibet, which spills over into the rest of the Asian continent. Because of the assimilation policies, there has been a lot of concern, and General Secretary Hu Yaobang in May 1980 suggested to reform program and integration policies rather than assimilation policies. Since then, we had 10 talks between the Dalai Lama's representative with the United Front Work Department of the CPPCC in China, but these 10 talks has not resulted in any solution to the Tibet issue. So that is the actual conundrum that the Tibetans face, because the Chinese say that they will only allow the personal safety of the Dalai Lama to go to Tibet. But of course, the Dalai Lama knows that he will be arrested once he lands in Tibet by the Chinese. And so he had not picked up any signal from China on returning to Tibet. All Tibetans, all Dalai Lamas have visited the monastery in Shanxi province, where Kublai Khan inaugurated these in 13th, 14th centuries, around that time, in Shanxi, Inner Mongolian borders. The current 14th Dalai Lama has not visited that place. He was invited in 1994 by Xi Jinping's wife, Pang Li Yuan, when she was organizing a Buddhist conference, international Buddhist conference. But the Dalai Lama did not go because there was the problem of personal safety of the Dalai Lama. Besides, there is no concrete offer from China in terms of what the Dalai Lama suggests to genuine autonomy in Tibet. So the Strasbourg proposals of 1987 and the speech in the US Congress by the Dalai Lama, these have, he pointed out 5 aspects of autonomy. Until unless these are guaranteed, there would not be any solution to the Tibetan cause. So this is the major problem between China and the Tibetans. As the Chinese focus only on the personal return of the Dalai Lama without giving anything in return for the Tibetans, while the Tibetans call for autonomy and Tibet Youth Congress calls for free Tibet. Although all, according to their constitution, the Tibetan's constitution, there is a Charter of Rights of 1992, which says only non-violence would be practiced as part of their agenda, political project. So, unlike the Uyghurs who take up to the arms, the Tibetans have non-violence. While the Chinese see this as an asset because there is no major violence in Tibet, yet this is one which is creating also a problem for China because of the non-violence being. Uh, uh, as a result, the Dalai Lama is the darling of the world in terms of the reception that he makes with the world leaders and the Nobel Peace Prize that he won in 1988. And subsequently, the kind of protests that are reflected in China, in Tibet, um, uh, quite frequently, including Beijing Olympics, the Lhasa uprising, as Ambassador Vishnu Prakash mentioned, the self-immolation attempts by over 160 Tibetan monks, mostly in Sichuan and Yunnan province, that is the Kham region, which is very restive in the. So I stop here by just suggesting that this is a major problematic for China as well as for the Tibetans. China, in terms of how they integrate, how they use the resources, there are protests all over. And most important, the American president, the former president, Trump had initiated the TPSA, Tibet Policy Support Act. So the Chinese criticized the so-called internationalization of Tibet issue. Um, uh, and uh, the context then is that this is leading to more tension between the Han and Tibetans in Tibet. Um, the TPSA basically is looking at the reincarnation issue uh, of the 15th Dalai Lama. As the current Dalai Lama is 86 years old, there is speculation and mainly drawn from the Chinese about the reincarnation. So Chinese keep flagging the golden dawn process, and this creates a huge problematic area. So these are issues of legitimacy. There is a lot of acrimony, and while the Dalai Lama had relinquished the temporal powers to the Sekyong, and there is a plan for giving bigger role for the current Karmapa Lama, and also the Sekyong is getting elected in a more popular mandate. They have their own elections. Currently, Pempa Sering. There is also militancy increasing in terms of demands from the Tibetans. And with the TPSA passed by the US, there is increased Tibetan political activity overseas that could be expected in the coming years. So let me stop here by just saying that this is the biggest conundrum for the Chinese as well as for the Tibetans, as their issues have not been resolved. And as Ambassador Vishnu Prakash mentioned, what they are seeking is educational autonomy, religious autonomy, cultural autonomy. Strasbourg proposal suggests to the economy, finance, foreign affairs, defense in the hands of China. Yet the Chinese are not satisfied and looking for the 15th Dalai Lama in order to divide the Tibetan community. So let me stop here, and we are willing to take questions.
Thank you, sir. Thank you both of you for such an enlightening session. It was really great to hear you. And now I think I'll just open up the floor for the questions. Either raise your hand or type your questions in the chat box. Yes, Ritika, please go ahead.
Good evening. First of all, thanks to both of the experts for such an astute talk. My question is for Professor Kondapalli. Sir, I wanted to ask you, what do you think about the Sinicization of Tibetan Buddhism? How possible it is in the upcoming future, and given the number of refugees we have in India, how that acts an impediment to that whole Sinicization process of the Buddhists in Tibet?
Ambassador Vishnu Prakash he could answer this question.
No, sir. This is your question, and I shall only be in the listening mode. Absolutely, your question.
Civicization here would basically mean if you see any Buddhist monastery in China, it is led by Communist Party members. The head monk will become a Communist Party member, and they will see that within religious affairs there is no international connection. So Sinicization here would mean the Communist Party dominating Buddhist religious scriptures, how they are interpreted, whether there is any problem for China or Han China in terms of implementing many of these scriptures. So that is essentially the Sinicization. It's not about China because 18% of Chinese believe in Buddhism, including some Communist Party members, by the way. Wen Xiaopao was a practicing Buddhist, the former premier. But the issue is the Communist Party dominance there. That is precisely the Sinicization. So if you look at the Chinese contribution to the Lumbini project, some $2 to $3 billion they gave for the reconstruction effort. It was actually created by a Japanese architect. Now the Chinese are pumping in money in order to control the Nepalese Buddhism, Nepalese related Buddhist activities, etc. So this is precisely the Sinicization. I refer to Ambassador Vishnu Prakash because in the foreign ministry they are watching the situation, and India has the International Buddhist Convention to bring in the Buddhist diaspora, Buddhist countries in order to practice their own religion in a more free manner, rather than by setting up the Communist Party branches within the monasteries.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Let me just add a wee bit. If you travel in China, you'll find that the Buddhist temples have been commercialized. The sanctity of religion or faith is gone. And when I was in China traveling, what I was initially shocked was that right in the Sanctum Sanctorum, at times, there is a shop selling trinkets. And imagine Buddhist monks being trained by the communists to say the right things after the prayers or after the preaching. The Buddhist monk in China will tell you how good the Communist Party is. So, and President Xi Jinping, when he went to Tibet also, he spoke about religion with Chinese characters. So short of saying that Lord Buddha had sanctified communism, which I think one day they will say that also, everything is kosher when they come, because for them, religion is a political tool. And so long as it serves the political purpose of the party, it's fine. If not, it has to be contained, or it has to be Sinicized, Chinized, whatever you like to call it.
Thank you, sir.
Excellent. There are no more questions.
No, sir. I just got a question from myself. Professor, you mentioned about the reception His Holiness gets across the world. But do you think the aesthetic of, and it's a question to both of you, the aesthetic of these receptions somehow undermines the focus that should be in real terms on the Tibetan cause?
At least I couldn't understand the question.
My question was the level and the way His Holiness is welcomed across the world is really commendable. But that does that reception reciprocates in terms of the Tibetan cause that should have been supported, in terms of materialistic support?
Dr. Kondapalli, can I just take a stab at it, and thereafter I'd like to be excused because I have to join another event. So if you don't mind, I'll quickly share my gyan and take the leave. You know, the fact is that the level of indifference, and I'm again not being diplomatic, I'm being speaking in very practical terms, the level of indifference and ignorance of the developing world uh, in the Western world is very limited. Look, if you just look at what has happened in Afghanistan, you will get to know, you will realize, and you will perhaps agree that I'm trying not to use a strong word. The lives, people, the concerns of the developing countries does not matter if it is not politically convenient. And so that is a reality now. His Holiness has managed to highlight the Tibetan cause. It's a unique in a tone deaf world, and I'm talking of the world, to highlight what has he got. He is a religious leader, but by his persona, by his principles that he stands for, by what he represents, he has constantly managed to highlight the cause and attract attention. I think that is the greatest achievement. And you know that some movies have been made, some high profile people have joined the cause. But at the end of the day, it's all dollars and cents. And it is all the big game. And because China is what it is, uh, as I said in my opening remarks, only when it is politically expedient, the Tibetan issue is dusted off, spoken of. Otherwise, it is not pursued. So that is a realistic picture. We like it or not like it. That's how it is. But let me thank the organizers, both of you, for putting together this wonderful event. And Dr. Kondapalli, thanks. Uh, I have learned a lot in the bargain. God bless you, and hope to see you again. Kindly excuse me. I have to be at some other event which came up suddenly because of certain circumstances. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Sir, if you could add something to that.
Yes, let me take it forward. What did the Dalai Lama get out of the internationalization of the Tibet issue? The Tibetans who are living abroad, they are seeking a few demands from the Chinese government. Originally going back to the 17-point declaration, many of these became contested. Religion became contested. The Tibetan education, culture, religion, etc., became contested. So the 10 talks that they held between the Dalai Lama's office and the United Front Work Department of the CPPCC, they were discussing those issues. And from 79 to 2010, they had these discussions. So let us look at some of these. For example, in 1979, the Dalai Lama delegation visited Tibet. Not he himself, but his delegation. So wherever the delegation went, the people started collecting the dust where the delegation members walked, because their belief was that this is their own God's delegation. The Dalai Lama is their God. So the God had sent the delegation, and so wherever they walked, that soil is sacred. So they started collecting dust from this, and of course revering. So that is the kind of reverence the Tibetans have. A second instance is there is a lot of smuggling of Satush wool in Tibet and in the Trans-Himalayan region. Satush wool, it fetches quite a huge in the smuggling market. And the antelope is a Tibetan antelope, from where there is the collection of the wool and others. So because of the grave situation of the antelope, the Dalai Lama had requested the smugglers in Tibet, people in Tibet, not to encourage the wearing of Satush wool, because if there is demand, there will be supply. So he requested that these smugglers observe the ban on Satush wool, and to the Chinese government chagrin, 97% of the people observed the Satush wool ban called by the Dalai Lama. So some Chinese say that even today the Dalai Lama has something like 97% popularity in Tibet. There is one scholar, Gordon Chang, who wrote a book on the coming collapse of China. Once he said in a meeting that the Dalai Lama is equal to 100 divisions. One division is about 10,000 troops, so you have 100 divisions. If he gives a call, which he has not given, if he gives a call for, like the Satush wool ban, and that would be observed by the Tibetans because the God himself had asked them to observe. So there is always the followers who will follow this, whatever the Dalai Lama, their God, suggests. So as a result, the Chinese have actually become very nervous of what would be the next position of the Dalai Lama. There is one Chinwes, Professor Chinwes, who teaches at the Central, who used to teach at the Central Party School, which was once headed by Xi Jinping. So Chinwes suggested that if you treat the Dalai Lama as enemy, as the Chinese do, because in some party secretaries' view, like Chen Chuanko, who is now the party secretary in Xinjiang, Chen Chuanko once said the Dalai Lama is a wolf in a monk's robes. So personal attacks on the Dalai Lama increase. So if you treat the Dalai Lama as an enemy, that is Han Chinese treating Dalai Lama as an enemy, you're alienating 6 million Tibetans in Tibet, because he is the living Buddha, and many Chinese also believe in Buddhism. This creates a major problem for the Chinese themselves. So Chinwes said that the Dalai Lama is the key to the issue of Tibet, and the Chinese government need to modulate. But that has not happened in terms of restarting a dialogue process with the Dalai Lama. So the so-called internationalization is actually a problem for China because of its record on human rights, on religious issues within Tibet. So as a result, of course, he gets more popularity abroad as they keep seeing the situation in Tibet. If the Tibetans are following non-violence, how come they are beaten up or killed? No international law would allow that kind of treatment. If the demonstrators follow non-violence, there is no legitimacy for China's violence. But how come 160 people have self-immolated? Why their demands are not met, or on others? So this becomes a problem for China. While China is saying, we are responsible stakeholder, we are a rising country. But when the Dalai Lama tells all these figures about the people being killed in Lhasa or other places, by following non-violence, the international community would then believe only the Dalai Lama, not the Chinese version. And when they look at all these white papers as well, and the fact that the Tibetans are not benefiting out of these, then obviously the issue becomes in political science, we have the political legitimacy. That becomes a problematic, and China is seen as an occupying force. And that is where the problem starts for China. So Chinwes' argument is you should not treat Dalai Lama as the enemy, but as the solution for the problem in Tibet.
I think we have a question in the chat box. Saurav, you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yes, I have a question. The view of China's Tibet Conundrum. Buddhism is very much popular in Tibet and also have a enhancement like a soft power. So, what I think, what after the Dalai Lama, who is very influential and which is considered as the enhancement in the culture of Buddhism. So, what after him, if China, I think China will consider more repressive behavior. So, what India should do, and what should be the India's position to safeguard Buddhist culture in the coming future?
Yeah, it's a futuristic question. The Dalai Lama jokingly said he is going to live for 124 years. And he also said he will pass away after some 14, 15 years or so. So above 100 years. So for the next 14, 15 years, he said he is not going to pass away. One doesn't know how he perceived. How can you perceive that you're going to pass away? But anyway, he said this jokingly, or probably he knows because he is also the God. And generally, that generation of leaders, that generation of religious, they have all these herbal medicines which results in longevity. And Tibetans are famous for that. So let us see if that becomes true. Whatever it is, of course, after all, he is also a human being, and the normal metabolism is for every human being. So we do not know whether he will live longer or the speculation about post-Dalai Lama actually came from the Chinese, not from the Tibetans, not from Indians, not from other international community. And why did the Chinese rise? The Chinese rise this because they want to contest the succession issue of the Dalai Lama, and they want to grab the Dalai Lama position, like they grabbed the Pancham Lama position. In Pancham Lama, 17th Pancham Lama, they have the Dalai Lama anointed boy was arrested. He's now in arrest, while Chinese anointed the Pancham Lama is now heading and doing all the religious functions, etc., and official other functions. He is second in the Tibetan religious hierarchy, while the Dalai Lama is number 1, and Karmapa Lama is number 3. They have the sects, several Buddhist sects as part of that. So the Chinese began discussing about the 15th Dalai Lama, not the Tibetans per se, not the others. And there is some politics behind, because they want to grab the Dalai Lama institution and divide the Tibetan community and create chaos among them. But of course, the Tibetans are smart. They know who their God is. You know who your God is. You don't have to be told so-and-so has been posted as your God. So the Tibetans know who will be their God, and according to tradition, the current Dalai Lama appoints the next Dalai Lama by foreseeing in his dreams a boy. He also said a girl could also be the next Dalai Lama. So the gender-related issues may also come up in the succession in the future. So the succession is in relation to the current Dalai Lama, who will foresee. Um, the question was, what should be India's position? Now, what happens if the next Dalai Lama comes from Tawang tract in Arunachal Pradesh? Because in 16th century, the fifth Dalai Lama came from Tawang. So that became a problem between India and China. So if the next Dalai Lama comes from Tawang, we had it. For the next 100 years, the India-China relations will not improve. We will have Galwan, we will have Doklam, we will have other events regularly. So we will have to build up forces to counter this. So that is the impact that probably India will have if the next Dalai Lama is from Tawang. There is also the Dalai Lama's formula in order to resolve this. The Dalai Lama is two institutions. One is he is the god. Second, he is the king, temporal ruler. Now, the temporal ruler position has been given to the Sikyong, who is directly elected by the Tibetans. Previously, Lobsang Sangye and now Pempa Sering, they are the Sikyong, so they are half Dalai Lama in a way because they are the rulers, they are the kings. Of course, there is no concept of king in Tibetans. They are now democratic. Three elections, there is some 80-90% voting pattern that happened in the recent elections and the previous elections. So they are popularly elected by the Tibetans, so it is a democratic setup. The Sikyong now has half of the duties of the Dalai Lama. And so the Dalai Lama had stabilized the situation for the Tibetans, even if the Chinese appoint a Dalai Lama. So that is how this is being resolved at the moment, by bifurcating the Dalai Lama from religious and the temporal powers. What if there is a Chinese Dalai Lama? Obviously, that will divide the Tibetans. That is the game plan of China in this regard. But of course, the Tibetans know who their god is. So that should resolve the problem in the future. At the moment, the creation of the Chinese appointed Pancham Lama had created the division among the Tibetans. So this is what the Chinese want probably, of dividing and sinicizing the Dalai Lama institution as well in the larger integration or assimilation policies. So that is, the other is that the Chinese themselves are saying that the Tibetans will take up to arms. The Xinhua news agency once said the Tibet Youth Congress is the Al-Qaeda of Tibet. We know what the Al-Qaeda is, and it is now gaining strength in Afghanistan. But none of the Tibet Youth Congress, they take AK-47s. None of them see what is happening in Afghanistan right now. None of them, they only carry probably some Buddhist scriptures, and like in what happened in Umbrella Movement in Hong Kong, they will quietly go sit there and do some prayers in terms of demonstrations. So that is what we would expect. But Xinhua news agency was provoking probably the Tibetans that they would take up to arms, and probably they want to also encash the global legitimacy to counter terrorism by labeling them as the next Al-Qaeda. But no such incidents have happened. No such. We saw the recent, somebody mentioned about the Chinese embassy protests. They just protested in a non-violent manner. Of course, they were bundled out by the Delhi police and taken back to the police stations. There is no violence there that we saw on that day, which suggests then that the Chinese would push, and that would become a problem for India. In the near future. So that is a policy implication that we have. But also imagine a situation where the TYC really becomes Al Qaeda. Let us, for the sake of arguing, so if because the Al Qaeda was responsible for the World Trade Center blasts, the Pentagon blasts in 9/11. So if the TYC blasts some major tower in Shanghai or others, then obviously the Chinese will also get provoked and attack probably the Dharamshala. But attacking Dharamshala is attacking India's sovereignty, right? So that would also have consequences in terms of a conflict between India and China. So that is also what we have to be prepared for in future if there is an escalation. As of now, we have not seen any violence. The maximum violence we saw is self-immolation, taking on one's own the violence, not on others, but on oneself. So this has created uncertainty. And so, of course, the international community will see through. And there is now a contest between US and China. The Biden administration began three things. One is great power competition. So competition with Russia and China. Secondly, on human rights. And thirdly, on democracy. So in other words, the Biden administration for the next 3-4 years is going to push this aspect, and TPSA promised some funding for the Tibetans in terms of publicity and other things. And there is, of course, the Tibet Travel Act or others. So the US-China contest on Tibet is likely to further expand as a result of the Chinese position on Tibet.